We just received the biggest update ever in Tower Defense X recently, giving us Nightmare Mode, Ultra Mode, and Nightmare Mode's Hidden Wave. And I have to say, I enjoyed Nightmare a lot. I think it's a fun experience with new and returning bosses, a bunch of new enemies, and some of the best music we've gotten yet. One of the best things they did with this update was giving a lot of enemies unique features about them. Point to almost any enemy in this mode, and you could tell me something unique about it. Air enemies also had a proper spotlight here, with even an entire wave dedicated to it as an air raid. That's not to say this mode was perfect, however, and some of its issues carry over to the whole of the game. This isn't a video specifically about Nightmare Mode, but in both it and the Hidden Wave, I couldn't help but feel like my options for anti-air were super limited. Out of all the towers in the game, it came down to just XWM turret, helicopter, and AA turret as my only real picks for anti-air. But Helicopter's vulnerability and low placement limit, as well as XWM's dynamic pricing and own placement limit, makes these inferior choices when compared to AA turret, unless I need to use them for ground enemies as well. But when it comes to flying enemies, AA turret does everything. Early game, close range, far range, and late game can all be handled by it, and all for an extremely cheap price. Its price of $450 also makes it cheap enough to be used as bait, with its slightly higher price tag being made up for with a rebuild. AA turret currently serves as a jack of all trades for anything flying. Not only have these issues been present from the tower's release, but now with new prominent flying bosses, it's becoming extremely obvious just how lacking our options are for killing flying enemies, and just how overpowered AA turret is. One of the biggest problems with this tower is just how good it is at killing flying enemies. Now, obviously this tower is meant to be good at just one thing, that being to kill air enemies. But compared to other options for anti-air, this thing is simply way more cost efficient with better range and doesn't have to worry about targeting both air and ground enemies, which leads it to outshining most other anti-air. For already being just $450, you don't really need to get too many of them. I mean, just look at this thing's cost efficiency. Until max level, the top path's cost efficiency is no higher than 83. And if you don't know, 83 is an incredibly good cost to damage ratio, being up there with things like John and Zed. And I said no higher than that. Most of the upgrades are even more cost efficient than that, getting as low as 34. And considering that John bottom path is very limited by range and Zed is a spawner tower that can never stop moving, AA turret blows these two's already impressive cost efficiency out of the water. This super good cost efficiency means that you don't have to spend a lot of money on defending flying enemies in the early waves, letting you invest almost all of your money into other towers. Now let's talk about the actual damage, not just the efficiency of it, because this thing is an absolute demon. On base path, this thing does 80 damage per shot. That's enough to one-tap some early flying enemies. The DPS goes from 13 to 39 on base path, which easily lets it deal with early flying enemies for a cheap price. The top path reaches up to 700 DPS with a splash radius of 4, making it very good at taking out crowds of flying enemies. Bottom path, on the other hand, goes for a single high target DPS, reaching up to over 1800 damage per second. This damage is just wild. If you need some perspective on just how powerful this is, the bottom path of AA turret and Golden Juggernaut are practically the same thing, with an unbuffed Gold Jug actually doing less than an AA turret. Top path is even better on AA turret than it is on Gold Jug, where it gets 200 more DPS than the Gold Jug, but with splash damage and way more range, all for a cheaper price. AA turret is literally just a better air Golden Juggernaut. Once again, yes, this thing is meant to be very good at killing air enemies, but it should not be overpowering all of the other options like this. Besides the helicopter, nothing can rival the sheer numbers of the AA turret. XWM, Ghost, Golden Ranger, Golden Mobster, or anything else in this game simply cannot compete with it at all, forcing players into needing to use it. It's a disadvantage to get less damage and range out of a tower that can hit both ground and air enemies, even if you can get a different damage type out of it. So not using AA turret is kinda like shooting yourself in the foot. A very similar choice to AA turret is XWM, which has bullet and explosive damage, no friendly buffs, rebuilds, and I guess they're both turrets. However, it costs astronomically more for an XWM than it does an AA. And to be clear, this isn't because XWM is bad. I think it's in a good state after the new balance changes. It can hit all enemy types, even if it does have dynamic pricing. But because of how much DPS AA turret does for so cheap, it makes all your other options obsolete, including XWM sometimes. How are Ghost and Golden Ranger, towers that deal 400 and 260 DPS respectively, supposed to compete against something like AA turret for early to mid-game anti-air DPS when it deals so much more damage for so much less money? AA turret superiority also mitigates flying enemies to a point where I can basically forget they're even there. It's very different if I use Golden Ranger, or Operator even, to take out flying enemies, where I consciously have to think about getting flying detection before they spawn. This makes me have to plan how I'm going to use tower paths more, since flying detection is only on the bottom paths of these towers, and each path on towers has its own pros and cons, such as Operator bottom path having flying detection and better cost efficiency in place for less range and no stealth detection, which is similar to Golden Ranger, but with that you get flying detection, more health, and a grenade ability in exchange for less raw DPS and more range. But when I can just use AA turret to counter all flying, I don't have to think about any of this. I simply take up one tower slot and place down a couple turrets to not worry about a whole layer of this game. Like I mentioned earlier, this thing is insanely efficient and basically has map-wide range by the time you get to 2-2. That, combined with the fact that it ignores ground enemies, lets this thing shred through them better than any other tower possibly can, and it's inherent to the fact that it ignores ground enemies. See, flying acts as a way to give enemies more layers to them, just like stealth does. Towers that can't see flying ignore them, but those that see both ground and flying ones have to split their time between targeting both. This means it's important for the towers that can target air to shoot at air enemies, while other towers take out ground ones. This not only makes it so killing enemies is more complicated, but it incentivizes players to use the targeting mechanic. But when you make a tower that ignores ground enemies, you practically disconnect the two layers of enemies. Now you don't have to spend any time strategizing how to overcome something like a tanky ground unit to get to the air ones, and besides the random option, targeting becomes much less necessary. And can I talk about the range of this thing? It starts off with 25, and by 2-2 has a whopping 58 range with no dead zone. Yeah, that's just with 4 upgrades, only totaling just barely over $2.5 thousand in overall cost. And this is disregarding the amazingly efficient DPS it has. On top path, its range continues to grow, from 63 to 93 all the way up to an incredible 184 at max. This thing can see the whole map easily, which isn't inherently bad, especially considering the minimum range mechanic it has to prevent you from placing them near the path. However, the minimum range on top path is so small before max level that this really doesn't matter at all. As long as I don't go above 4x, I never really worry about the 7 or 10 minimum range. Even if I happen to place it slightly too close to the path and there's a dead zone, it's never enough to affect much. In fact, I don't think there's been a single situation where I felt it affected anything. Once the enemies pass through that spot, even if it does touch the path, I can just rely on the map-wide range to finish them off. And since a lot of obstacles don't affect its line of sight because it only targets the air, this fact is bolstered. Plus, there's usually more than one air enemy on the battlefield at any given moment, meaning the turret can just shoot at something else in the meantime. I mean, in what world does this minimum range even do anything to stop me from shooting enemies? I have an entire 63 range to work with, and only 7 of that is dead zone. That is 56 range uninhibited. It genuinely might as well not exist on 3 and 4x because it is so minimal. I think this is a huge issue since you can use it both close and long range, defeating the point of both the minimum range and part of the bottom path's whole shtick. We should let the top path be something you have to use in the far range and only far range. Otherwise, you can use bottom path for close range or another tower. Right now, it's way too effective at close and long range and can almost power creep its other path. In a way, at least. See, on bottom path, the turret has become a C-ram, which is basically just a minigun that shoots into the air. Bottom path's range is notably less than top path, but it is not small by any means. One big thing about this is that it doesn't have a dead zone, meaning it's intended to be placed close to the path and in positions where it can get the most out of its range. And to be honest, I think the way that bottom path's range works is fine. The real issue arises from top path being able to outshine its close range performance for a lot cheaper. Since it's $5,000 less to get a 4-2 turret than a 2-3, you can substitute top path for bottom path and not feel many of the disadvantages while retaining the advantages. More range, splash damage, and less price make it way too good of a deal over bottom path, with only a few scenarios proving 2-3 to be the superior option. So like I said, top half needs to be changed to be less effective at close range. But surely a tower like this would cost a lot in the shop, right? I mean, it takes the place of a bunch of other towers and is absurdly powerful, so it's probably around, I don't know, 50 to 55,000 gold? I mean, it is more powerful, cost efficient, and with better range than basically every other tower. Well, for some reason, this tower is only 11,000 gold with no level requirement. That's just preposterous. Having a tower that decimates an entire enemy group and that deals better damage than a golden juggernaut for less price than a normal juggernaut is genuinely crazy. And sure, the thing doesn't have a lot of health unless you get X5, but that doesn't make up for the fact that the turrets aren't really that targeted by enemies. Besides Artemis, I can't think of anything that specifically takes out AA turrets well. The only time I end up replacing these already low cost towers is occasionally after a boss wave, or maybe an enemy happened to hit it on an off chance. But overall, for just how powerful this tower is, its survivability is much too high. The tower's incredibly good cost efficiency means that even when I do replace this thing, it doesn't do too much to my wallet. This makes it so that I can practically always have my anti-air batteries placed down, and any replacements are few and far between. Not only does this make AA turret an even more valuable choice since I don't really have to pay attention to or spend money on it, but when I can always have this kind of anti-air online, air enemies are minimized to the point of being no more than an afterthought. Now, I've talked a lot about the issues of AA turret, but how do we actually fix this? Well, if you ask me, this tower should have never existed in the first place. So, kind of obviously, my opinion is that this should be outright removed. To repeat myself, I do not think this tower should exist in the first place. Any rework to it still does not mitigate the fact that its concept is fundamentally broken. Could you imagine having a tower that killed every stealth enemy for you so well it made everything else with stealth detection unnecessary, and it also couldn't see unstealthed enemies? And it also had such good cost efficiency and range that no matter when or where you placed it in the match, it would still do its job just as well? Or the fact that it's one of the top bait towers as a bonus? I mean, I asked you guys what you thought, and the results were almost across the board saying it's a bad idea. And what's this? Everyone's mentioning how that would just be AA turret, but for stealth? Do you see what I'm getting at here? When AA turret can outclass other early game options and late game ones, it becomes a jack of all trades. Honestly, a master of all trades. It's cost efficient enough to let you rely on it for early game, but it's also the most effective way of killing enemies in the late game by design. Nothing but helicopter can compete with this thing's anti-air DPS. Since it's still pretty cheap and has no placement limit though, all you need to do to kill air enemies is just spam some top paths on the outside of the map, or wherever if you just don't max it out, with maybe a few bottom paths. To be honest, it doesn't really matter. Since it can be used for the entirety of the match, you get so much value out of this one tower slot. And remember how I mentioned this thing served as bait? Yeah, that just adds to the value you get from bringing this thing. Just like the Sentry, this tower is cheap to place and comes with a rebuild. This lets it be extremely good for bait since you don't have to micro their placements for them as much to still be effective. They practically replace themselves. Versatility is one of the things at the core of what makes AA turret so game breaking, and letting it serve as a bait tower on top of already being extra good leads it to dominating over other towers. XWM turret was a big issue until very recently, where it was just like AA turret but even worse in some regards. Looking at lessons from it, towers that can do everything for you make the game not only unfun but brain dead. And one of the big issues with these no friendly buff towers is that they don't have to rely on other towers to make them so good. All you need to do is have the tower itself, and it's self-supporting. I remember John saying how XWM is more of a casual friendly tower, and AA feels like it's supposed to be that too, but for flying enemies. But considering how XWM turned out, it's probably best to avoid repeats. Overall, AA turret's current state leads to the game being more one-dimensional, less strategic, and frankly just worse, since all I do is place one tower and let it handle an entire enemy type. It feels like most towers with anti-air get outshined by AA turret, which is very limiting as a player. The range, DPS, cost efficiency, and everything else about it is so much better than all the other normal balanced towers, and there are only a handful of times I have to think outside the box, or should I say outside the turret, on how to counter air enemies. AA turret practically always provides far more than enough range and DPS to kill any enemy. Its cost efficiency is ultra high, letting you purchase and upgrade these things quickly. It never stresses your econ to use this thing. In fact, it's more of a benefit to it in a way. The minimum range put in place on 3 and 4x is also too small to have a real effect. AA turret has diminished flying enemies to a point where they really don't matter at all, since the only thing they do is make you have to place down a turret and upgrade it occasionally. Beyond the choice to place it in a particular spot to get the most range out of it, there's not much to strategize with this tower. Luckily, not all hope is lost for us. Recently, in the Shattered Moon event, we saw Operator and Sniper get buffed to have earlier anti-air detection, which was a great change. I love Bottom Path Operator for its cost efficiency, and giving it flying detection at X3 was a great change to it. It made it so much more valuable. Sniper got a pretty fair buff too, giving him flying detection by default. This really helped more intermediate towers get air detection early, something that was pretty lacking before. Most importantly, AA turret had a price increase in this mode, and it made it so much better. Since every level's cost was increased, the disparity between its cost efficiency and that of the other towers was lessened, making them viable. I had a lot of fun using Operator and Sniper to handle early game flying detection, and it felt a lot better than just using AA turret. Shattered Moon's balancing around air enemies is a great direction for the game, and I really hope we see more action to move away from AA turret's dominance. Flying enemies should be a real factor in gameplay, not something we counter at the cost of just one tower slot. And here's another video where I talk about TDX.